Hey, it's Ross from rosslukeman.com, and today I'd like to talk to you about an easy and affordable way to monitor your water tank levels. And this is an often overlooked subject, especially for people who are building their very first van. And this is something I'm guilty of overlooking in my first van, especially with the cost of your electrical systems. Nobody wants to spend an extra $300 to $500 to monitor their water tanks, and a lot of us end up just saying, I'll look under the cabinet and check my tank level. But we run into issues if you have opaque tanks like this where you can't see the level, or a lot of times it's a good idea to put the tank underneath the vehicle and then you really can't see it unless you crawl under there and look. Even if it's a white tank, you got to get down on the ground and look up, and about that time you're feeling like you should have put in a water tank monitor. So I'd like to talk about the Kib Micro Monitor. This has been used in the RV industry for many years. They do have some that are more expensive, other brands that have more expensive, more accurate monitors. For this, it's just going to tell you either empty, 1/3 full, 2/3 full, or full. So some of the other brands will tell you, 63% full, so they're going to be a little bit more accurate. But if you want kind of an entry-level monitor that's going to give you the information you need and make sure you don't run out of water when you go out on a trip, this is a great little monitor to start with. And it also has an integrated pump switch. So you want to have a water pump cutoff switch. The water pumps have a internal switch where they pressurize the line and they'll cut themselves off. But if your tank runs out of water, the pump will keep running trying to pressurize the line and it can burn itself out. So you want to have a switch, and this is an industry standard thing to do, is have that cutoff switch somewhere in your vehicle. And with the micro monitor, they've got it integrated into the unit. So this will cut off your pump, and it'll also monitor 3 water tanks. So you can have a fresh tank, a gray water tank, and a black water tank. And it also has a little battery monitor where it'll tell you 1/3, 2/3, or full for your battery. It's going to measure by the voltage of the battery. That I would go ahead and get a separate battery monitor, but it does have that included here. But it can be a little bit intimidating with the wiring. You can see it's like, where do you start with all this? And so what I'd like to do in this video is just wire each wire one by one. So what we'll start out with is we're going to wire this to our 12-volt fuse panel to power it up. And then we'll connect it to our pump, and then we'll connect it to this tank. And we're going to call this a freshwater tank, and I'll show you which wire to connect to back here for your freshwater tank. So let me go ahead and wire it to our 12-volt power source, and we'll talk about it. All right, so we've got 12-volt power tied in from our fuse panel to the Kib Micro Monitor. You're going to want to use a 10 amp ATC fuse. That's a red automotive fuse. And that fuse size is mainly for the water pump. These tank sensors are not going to take a whole lot of power, but because we're powering the pump through this unit, we need to size our fuse for that amount of power, and the pump we're using recommends that 10 amp red fuse. So as far as the conductor, we have a 14 gauge 2 conductor marine duplex cable. This has a red positive and a black negative. And we're just going to tie that into the red from the Kib Micro Monitor. And then for the negative side of the Kib, they're going to use white wires. And they have kind of a multi-connector here where all the white wires are going to go in. So that's our kind of our negative bus, so to speak, where all negatives connect. And so we are going to tie the white wire coming out of that to the black negative from our line. So sometimes your wire colors are going to mate up and they're not going to be the same color. But as long as you know what's positive and what's negative, the wire color can change. It's not convenient, but it happens sometimes. So, and in the RV industry, you'll see a lot of times white is used for negative. So that's something to look out for. Now, I have made kind of a rookie mistake on our butt splices here. I ran out of the blue 14 to 16 gauge butt splices. Because we're using 14 gauge wire, we would want to use the blue ones and have those butt splices as fit as closely as possible to the size of the wire, and that's going to help prevent wires from pulling out of the butt splice. It's just going to be a more secure connection, and in general you want to use the right size butt splice so you have a strong connection. But definitely for our example today, these butt splices will do the trick. And as you can see, with the switch lighting up, our micro monitor is now powered up and the little circuit board is powered up and it's ready to take some tank readings. Now our purple wire here, you probably can't see, but we have a purple wire going out. That's going to be our positive wire going to the water pump. So the red is going to be the incoming power. It's going to power up the unit. And then the purple is going to send that power on to your pump. And of course your pump negative, you're just going to tie in to all the white wires here. If your negative is white or black or yellow, whichever cable you end up using, you just want to tie in the negative to this little bus where all the white negatives tie in. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. We'll bring in our pump and talk about that. All right, we've now got our pump tied in and you can see that the pump switch works. And I'll just show you my connection really quickly. We use more of the 14 gauge 2 conductor marine duplex cable. Use the same yellow butt splices to connect. Red goes to red, black goes to black there at the pump. And it says please use a 10 amp fuse on the pump. So if you forget the fuse size, it's right there on the label. And I should mention this is a SureFlow Revolution 3 gallon per minute pump. Another industry standard product that's been a very reliable pump. I would recommend that you put a strainer on the intake side of here. It's about $8. And then I do recommend also the accumulator, which is like a rubber bladder that's pressurized, and that will extend the life of the pump along with the strainer. The accumulator will prevent the pump from turning on and off as much. So it'll kind of save the internal pressure switch from constantly kicking on and off, and it'll smooth out the water flowing through your faucet or coming out of your faucet. So that's the pump side. And then over here at the monitor, as I said before, we've got our purple power wire coming out of the micro monitor. That's going to connect to the red of our cable to send that positive down to the pump. And then our black negative is going to come back from the pump. And I've tied it into our little connector here with all the white wires there at our negative bus. So like I said before, the wires are different colors, but we know that's all negative. So we're going to tie the negative from the pump in there with the other negatives. So at this point, we've got power from our 12 volt fuse panel, and we're able to send it on to the pump and power that up. Now, the point of this video is to measure the water tank level. So let's move on and talk about that. As I said before, we're going to call this the freshwater tank. And let me explain the little wires here. So we've got some small gauge wires in the back. You can tell the power wires that power up the pump, they're bigger, thicker wires. And then the small gauge wires that are 20 to 22 gauge, they're much smaller, and they are to monitor the water tanks. We've just got 3 wires for our 3 tanks, and the color coding here is pretty self-explanatory. It's kind of neat how they do it. The blue is for your freshwater tank. So you think about freshwater is nice and blue. The gray wire is going to be for your gray water tank. And for your black water tank, they have a brown wire. And you may guess why that's brown. It's the color of poop. I'll just go ahead and spell it out for you. But that makes it easy for you to figure out which tank needs to tie into which wire. And then from all the tanks, the negatives are going to be white. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a blue and a white wire. You can use 18 gauge, 20 gauge, and you can use a power drill, hold the wires on one end and spin the drill, spiral those wires together, and we're going to have a blue and a white conductor spiraled together running over to our freshwater tank. Now, I should mention this little contraption here. There are 3 of these that come with the Kib Micro Monitor, and this basically has resistors in there that are going to take a reading, and even though we've got multiple wires here, that reading is going to get resolved right here at the tank with this little red piece right here. So the resistors are in there, and then you're just going to have a positive and negative going back. So we've got a white negative, as I said, and the red is going to be your positive. So because this is the fresh tank, we're going to have a blue wire coming in as our positive to this tank, and that blue wire is going to connect to the red, which is the positive coming off of the tank. I hope that all made sense. But again, it's knowing what you have, which one is negative and which one is positive. You can connect them even if they're different colors. You just know for the freshwater tank we're going to be sending a blue wire as our positive. So let me go ahead and get that wire and connect it over to our tank, and we'll take a reading. Alright, so we've got our tank tied in. We've got our blue and white wires spiraled together here like I mentioned. The blue is connected to the red, the white is connected to the white, and I've gone down a size in our butt splices from, well, these would have been blue. One size down from blue is the red, and those are for 18 gauge to 22 gauge wires. So I wanted to get that butt splice as small as possible because we're dealing with some pretty small wires and we want to make sure those don't pull out. And I should mention also, I'm using heat shrink butt splices, the heat shrink variety. So you would shrink these down with either a butane torch or a propane torch, or a heat gun would also work. And I like to use these, one, because they're going to keep moisture out of that connection. Some parts of a van conversion or RV, they get wet. If you're near the shower or you're near a water tank or you're filling your tank or whatever, some places are wet, but also just to give it additional strength so that wire doesn't pull out. Really, I guess my greatest fear is to have a wire that disconnects somewhere in the wall and I don't know it's disconnected and the device doesn't work. That's kind of a fear of mine. So I just use the heat shrink butt splices and get the proper size and get the heat shrink variety to make sure that connection is solid and is not going to pull apart. So I already explained that connection, and over here we just connected the blue to the blue. So for once we have two wires of the same color connecting to each other. Blue to blue, pretty straightforward there. And then the white is going to tie into our negative bus again. And if we come in here, we should be able to take a reading. We just hit the fresh button. And as you can see, it's telling us it is completely empty. Because this is completely empty for the demo, I'm going to have to put some water in it and we can take another reading. So I'll go ahead and do that. Alright, moment of truth. I've added some water to our tank. By the way, this is a Volterra 9-gallon ABS plastic tank. I've added enough water to get the water level over our first couple of probes here. And we should have a 1/3 reading on our monitor. So let's check it out. We hit the fresh. And there it is. We got 1/3 of a tank. So cool to see that that's working. I would like to talk about these probes a little bit more. So they are called probes, and they're made by KIB. And basically you're going to drill into the tank with, I believe it's a 3/8 drill bit. And they have a little rubber boot, and you're going to tighten the nut down and it's going to expand to seal that hole. And as far as the placement, these are admittedly a little bit off. Really what you could do is put it at 1/4 of the way up, halfway up, 3/4 of the way up. And then the readings will be empty, 1/3, 2/3, and full. I've kind of moved them around. You can shift their location a little bit if, you know, like to say full to get above this last one, it really has to be full. Maybe you could lower that a little bit, but it's a little bit up to interpretation. If you just want to go by the instructions, just go 25%, 50%, 75% as far as where you place those probes. And I would like to say too, this ground probe, the fourth one, it needs to be at or below that first probe because that is basically, it's conducting electricity through the water to take that reading. And so you have to have a positive and a negative. And if the water level gets over this first probe, but the ground lug or the negative lug is too high, it won't be able to get that full circuit to take a reading. So you need that one at or below that first probe. And another thing to note, I missed this on my first try with this particular system. You want to put these wire colors in a certain order. So yellow is going to be at the bottom, green is going to be in the middle, and orange is going to be at the top. So do that order and you'll get a correct reading over at the micro monitor. So I hope that was helpful. That is the KIB Micro Monitor. If you want something that's a little bit more accurate, I'll go ahead and mention they have the sea level monitors from Garnet Instruments, and those are going to give you a percentage like 63% full, and they'll also monitor all 3 tanks as well as have a switch for your pump. That's from Garnet Industries. And then if you use the Servo GX from Victron, that is going to monitor your solar and your inverter charger, but it'll also do your water tanks. But you're going to be in the $500 to $600 range by the time you buy that and buy the tank level monitors, which are a little bit different than these. But I wanted to mention those so you're not stuck with the KIB. But like I said, this is an industry standard water tank monitor system that's been used for decades in the RV industry. And it's a great little system. For $50 or $60, you can get those tank levels. You may want to use for the gray water tanks and the black water tanks. Sometimes they get a slime in there and it gives a false reading at the monitor. But they have some probes called the Horst Miracle probes. It's HORST, and those prevent the false readings in the gray water tanks and the black water tanks. These are fine for the freshwater tanks. The Horst Miracle probes, they make specific ones for gray water tanks and specific ones for black water tanks, and that will get around the slime problem. I hate to say it, but you get bacteria, especially in the gray water tank. You know, you're washing your hands at the sink. Bacteria gets in that tank and creates a slime. It can create a false reading. Want to go with the Horst Miracle probes to get around that. So I hope that was helpful and helps you with this small part of your electrical system. If you'd like additional help, I've got a free guide for you called the Van Power Cheat Sheet. And all you have to do is go to rosslukeman.com/vanpower and you can download that free cheat sheet. It's got a lot of information on solar power, shore power, alternator power. It's got a great little diagram that shows you how they all tie in and get distributed throughout your van. And it talks about different battery chemistries and the strengths and weaknesses of different battery types. It's really a great overview if you want to get started with your van's power system. Again, go to rosslukeman.com/vanpower, one word. And you can also click the link below to download that. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you again real soon.